Isaiah chapter 40, verses 21 through 31. Have you not known? Have you not heard? Has it not been told you from the beginning? Have you not understood from the foundations of the earth? It is he who sits above the circle of the earth, and its inhabitants are like grasshoppers, who stretches out the heavens like a curtain and spreads them like a tent to live in, who brings princes to naught and makes the rulers of the earth as nothing. Scarcely are they planted, scarcely sown, scarcely has their stem taken root in the earth, when he blows upon them and they wither, and the tempest carries them off like stubble. To whom then will you compare me? Or who is my equal, says the Holy One. Lift up your eyes on high and see. Who created this? He who brings out their host and numbers them, calling them all by name, because he is great in strength, mighty in power, no one is missing. Why do you say, O Jacob, and speak, O Israel? My way is hidden from the Lord, and my right is disregarded by my God? Have you not known? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He does not faint or grow weary. His understanding is unsearchable. He gives power to the faint and strengthens the powerless. Even youths will faint and be weary, and the young will fall exhausted. But those who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint.
Have you ever heard of something called dissociation? Dissociation is a break in how our minds handle information. A person experiencing dissociation may feel temporarily disconnected from their thoughts or feelings, from their memories or current surroundings. Dissociation can affect our sense of time, our perception of identity. Most commonly, it's something that's brought on by a trauma, but not always. It's the body's way of protecting us. And usually, it goes away on its own in a matter of minutes or hours, sometimes days, occasionally longer. On January 6th, when the very stability of our government was under siege, I experienced an episode of dissociation. Like all of you, I was reading the news feeds and watching the pictures, but I felt nothing. I was completely numb. This numbness lasted through the inauguration. And even though I was so excited about this new administration, and I knew Lady Gaga's dress was off the chain, and there was so much to appreciate, I still felt nothing. I mention this because rather than feeling fearful of it, I became curious about it. And I contacted some of my friends who are clinical professionals who know a lot more about these things than I do. And I began to understand that what had happened to me is that my body simply couldn't take one more red flag warning. This past week there was an article in The Atlantic that caught my attention And the title was something like Hitting the Pandemic Wall. Hitting the Pandemic Wall. So I Googled it, and it turns out there's all kinds of information coming out now about how we as a society are kind of hitting this place where we just can't take much more. And where on occasion our bodies, in order to protect us, just kind of check out. It's little wonder that at the year mark of this pandemic, people are experiencing what psychiatrists are calling emotional burnout. One healthcare professional explained it like a bank account. He said, you've got a debit card of energy, and now you've used the debit card so that your balance is at zero, but you kept using the debit card, and so you've depleted all your resources. At the same time, many of us are a little ashamed to feel what we're feeling. We don't feel necessarily entitled to feel stressed out or anxious or helpless or hopeless. But we know rationally the only way to move through those feelings is by acknowledging them, by having them normalized, by talking about them, talking through them. So that's what I'm hoping to do with this message. Professionals explain that what we have experienced this past year amounts to something called collective demoralization. Demoralization is when the expected natural outcome of something repeatedly does not materialize. When moral challenges around us are unmet over and over again, we internalize a very real sense of existential despair. Demoralization occurs when challenges to adjust our expectations no longer feel temporary. During this pandemic, we've had to adjust our expectations. Over and over again, our lives have had to be adjusted in ways that are starting to feel long-term. And although they can feel similar, demoralization and depression are not the same. Although when we are demoralized, we may also feel depressed, meaning it's hard to get motivated. Some days we'd rather just sleep. But this is temporary, unlike clinical depression. The low-grade depression many of us are feeling right now has a direct correlation to the vicarious trauma of having lost thousands upon thousands of lives due to this pandemic. The depression associated with demoralization is related to the chronic disruption of patterns. Patterns in our dailiness, patterns in our relationships. Fatigue builds up over time, and without any definitive end in sight, it is completely normal to hit a psycho-spiritual wall. So rest assured, you are okay. You may still experience moments of happiness or days when you feel like yourself, but the consistency may be missing. We will make it through, but we're not through yet. So it's important to create spaces where we can be honest about where we are, without judgment, without shame. And it occurs to me that we are weary because there is so much unprocessed grief. Really nowhere to manage that grief, no collective expression of that grief, save for the few moments on the National Mall that we all experienced the night before the inauguration. We might feel that because there's a new president and vice president in office and a vaccine that's slowly but becoming more and more available, that we ought to be looking on the bright side, moving on from what was hard, but we can't move on address where we've been and in many ways where we still are. Katie took me away for an overnight this past week for my birthday, and as it happened, she wasn't feeling well. She hit her own pandemic wall. So we lit the Duraflame and we turned on the television at the bottom of the bed, and it turned out that PBS was covering the memorial of Brian D. Sicknick, the Capitol police officer who died from injuries sustained while clashing with the mob that stormed the Capitol. Officer Sicknick was only the 5th person to lie in state in the Capitol building. And we watched for a long time while his fellow officers silently paid homage to his memory, to his life, to his service. And then President Biden arrived without having alerted the press to his plans. He and Jill Biden were in and out of the building in less than 10 minutes. They efficiently and effectively refused to draw attention to themselves. It was so dignified, so thoughtful, so normal, that I began to feel my feelings again. It was as if the color was coming back into my body. Have you not known? Have you not heard? Has it not been told to you from the beginning? We may fail. God does not. We may grow faint and weary and exhausted, but our God is an endless source of renewal. Beloved, here's the good news. God is God, and we are not. There are natural limits to how much you and I can take. Our God is limitless. Let us take consolation from that truth. You and I might need to check out every now and again. God never checks out. Might that be a balm in Gilead as we move through these next few months? Cut yourself some slack. Hitting the wall is a completely valid response to totally irregular circumstances. So breathe slowly. Listen to the sounds around you. Take off your shoes and walk barefoot on the earth, allowing her to call us back to ground. You're okay. We'll make it through this together. Amen.
When you walk through the storm, keep your head up high and don't be